On the WMO meeting that was held on the 7th and the 8th of May in Vancouver, the first day was a WMO council meeting. The council is just the member bodies of the WMO that met on the first day. It's more like a board meeting, is the best way to describe it, where we dealt with a number of official stuff. And then the second day was in the form of a forum, and that was attended by more or less 65 to 70 people from approximately 11 different countries. Miles is going to talk more about the outcome of those two sessions. Then on the Wednesday, the INC started. That was on the 9th of May, 19th and 11th of May. That was attended by 1,300 people, approximately from 65 different countries. And there were, apart from a few keynote addresses and an opening address by the CEO of the INC, 9 different nut roundtable conversations. So each one of the different tree nuts, and then also the peanuts, were given an opportunity to talk about the industry, what they see as the volumes, the carryover stock, and what they see the markets to be. And quite interesting to note their different views. I think a key takeaway for us from this INC conversation was that the sentiment across the board from all different nut categories were more positive this year than what it was in the past. And that includes the sentiment around the macadamias, and you will hear more from Lizelle when she's going to talk about the roundtable conversation for macadamias. With that short introduction, I'm going to hand over to Miles to talk us through the WMO 2 days. Miles.
Thanks very much, Perry, and welcome everybody, and good afternoon to everybody. As was said by Perry, there was an overwhelming theme of a more positive outlook for nuts in total, but there was also another theme in terms of the prices that are seeing across all nut types, except for maybe pistachios, that these prices for most industries are unsustainable. When chatting to our other origin counterparts in macadamias, this was also reinforced at the number of their industries, particularly Australia, Kenya, even China, and even parts of South Africa, that these prices are unsustainable going forward. So despite the positive outlook, the prices that we're seeing across nut industries, there is a definite theme that they're unsustainable. If we look at the first slide we have up on your screens, this looks at the supply forecast from 2024 to 2029. So despite the drop in the prices that we've had over the last year, this really represents all those major plantings that happened in the late teens. So from 2015 to 2020, where we saw substantial plantings at those high prices around the world. And this has recently been updated. You would have seen a similar slide at the last IMC, but this is the latest update to 2029. What this shows us is that the blue on your screens is the forecast to 2024, and then the brown or the orangey brown is the forecast for 2029. So if you look from a total world perspective, we're expecting an addition of 220,000 tons of macadamias over that period. And who's the culprit for this big increase in tonnage? Well, China is one, but the data out of China is difficult to attain, so that's our best guess when it comes to China. Kenya are expecting a increase from 46,000 to 75,000. The rest of Africa, as well as you might know, a lot of South Africans have invested in Zambia, Malawi, Mozambique, and even Zimbabwe, and there'll be a definite increase from the rest of Africa. Australia, despite the problems in the Northern Rivers area around the New South Wales in terms of their production and their cost of production in the area, there's been substantial plantings up in the Bundaberg area. And that big increase from 56 to 98,000 is on the back of those plantings in Bundaberg. In South Africa, we're forecasting a crop in 2029 of 150,000 tons, but that's probably more on the conservative side. the range probably ranges from about 150 to 170,000 tons. So of that 220,000 ton increase over the next 5 years, South Africa accounts for close to 30% of it. And this gives us an average annual growth of 10.3%. So this is a challenge going forward, but it is also an opportunity, because in the past, when chatting to brand owners or innovators or new products, we were never able to guarantee supply over a period of time. But now the conversations that our handlers and our marketers can have with the customers around the world is that we will have the supply, and therefore you can rely on us to add it to your products. So that's what we're looking like for the supply to 2029. If we go to the next slide, please, Terry. So this is a demand map of, and it's quite a complicated slide. This is essentially what we're looking at, our best guess of what the current demand is, and what we need to do in these markets going forward in order to take up that supply that we see. So the circles if we just start off with North America, those light blue circles that you see in North America that aren't outlined, those are the current demand in North America. So the light blue represents snacking, and that represents 1,000 tons of kernel. The purple represents ingredients, and that also represents 1,000 tons of kernel. The pink represents food service, that represents 1,000 tons of kernel, and then the yellow is oil, and that represents 500,000 kgs of oil. So that is what our best guess of the current North American demand is. The dots to the right of that is what the best guess in terms of what we need to add to that market over the next 5 years, and what the industry believes. So this is from brand owners to wholesalers to processors that had input into what this demand looks like. So what this shows you across the regions is that and if we look at China on the right-hand side with the blue dot with the white dot inside it, that is a nut and shell, and that represents 3,500 tons of nut and shell. What this table really shows us that our market is really concentrated in China. If we look at last year's consumption, 300,000 tons of product was produced worldwide. If we take 90,000 tons having been imported to China and them eating their own crop of between 50 and 60,000, that means half of the world's crop was consumed by China. So this really shows us we've got a massive concentration risk with being concentrated in the Chinese market. And therefore, we need to develop particularly the North American market and the European market so that we can reduce this concentration risk. And that's where the WMO fits into, because we're looking at increasing North America particularly, and also India. India is one of those markets that, yes, is currently quite small, but it's a market that we're targeting for 5 to 10 years down the line. The Almond Board, who did their research into India and their consumer campaigns, took 5 years to really get any volume moving into India. So we need to start that process now, and we should see significant results hopefully in 5 to 10 years' time. But in the short term, we really are focusing on North America and China in that case. But we've definitely got a concentration risk at the moment in our consumers. Next slide, please, Perry. So part of the WMO, we tried to look at what the 8 drivers of growth for macadamias going forward, and these are some of the trends in the marketplace currently from a consumer perspective. And macadamias is quite odd in terms of we fit a significant amount of those trends. So we do not fall out of any of them, but we actually fit into a number of them. So these are just the 8 on top. Is that consumers, particularly in the US, are looking for naturally functional foods. Social media is very, very important currently, particularly around the young consumers. And we've seen with our social media campaign last year, this has been very, very successful. Consumers are also rethinking fat. So if you think back to the 80s and 90s, fat was bad for you. The new research on fat is different, and therefore the health conscious consumers is rethinking fat. In terms of foods that boost both mood and mental health, macadamia sits very well in that stage. And then particularly for macadamia oil, if we look at all the oils that are on offer, macadamia sits up in the top 2 of being the healthiest for you. So that's a very good aspect for us going forward. Then there's obviously this trend, and you would know this trend is more fat, fewer carbs. So we fit that sort of diet. And then very recently, continuous glucose monitors. So not only for diabetics, but influencers have been attaching these glucose monitors to themselves and then actually monitoring what is happening in terms of their blood sugars after eating certain products. And macadamias doesn't cause a spike in blood sugar at all. So it fits within that trend, and we should be able to ride that trend going forward. Influencers in the space are doing quite a lot of work, and obviously we're engaging with them as we go. Next slide, please, Barry. In terms of a nutritional narrative, we can list off 30 or 40 good things about macadamias, but one thing from a marketing perspective is that we must make sure that our message is both concise and consistent. If we say the same few things multiple times to consumers and they receive it through different media, then the consumers, both their attention will be captured and we'll retain those consumers going forward, similar to what the AVOs have done over the last 20 years. So therefore, what the WMO came up with is we sat down and agreed what our nutrition and narrative going forward. So hopefully going forward, all the marketers out there from both our handlers as our brand and the brand owners down the line are going to use this sort of narrative going forward so that we are consistent with our messaging. So the first one obviously is macadamias are full of good fats, we're low in carbs, we are a real natural whole food. We help in inflammation, and obviously we're satisfying. We've got a great taste to it, but also we keep you full for longer is the narrative that we have agreed upon to take forward. Next slide, please, Perry. In terms of what the WMO has done over the last couple of years, and it's only been in existence for a short period of time, if we look at the US, this is quite a lot of text, but I'm sure a lot of you will read it as I talk. In the US, we've been focused on digital advertising, quite a lot of PR activity, and we've got some very, very good coverage across the media in different aspects. So we're seeing a big pickup in the US. One thing we know about the US is that the penetration in terms of the number of consumers that eat macadamia nuts is very, very low, and therefore it's a market that it offers us a big opportunity going forward. In India, we've recently reported back from our trip in India, but just to reinforce, we're only really targeting the top 10% of the population. The WMO is really only targeted Delhi to start with. We hope to move to Mumbai over the next 12 months. But essentially, we're targeting dietitians from a referral perspective, as well as the high-end market, and we're seeing a huge amount of interest, and that hasn't quite transposed into major demand as yet. But as stated, this is going to be a market that takes 5 years to develop. Then in China. China has been a really exciting market over the last year and very, very important to the offtake that we've seen, particularly from South Africa over the last year. The low price in China has done a lot of the marketing for us. We've seen a huge amount of innovation in China. The Chinese consumer as well as the Chinese traders are very, very quick to take advantage and drop prices over and move forward with their products, and we've seen that take up a huge amount of demand. If you see, last year we probably exported between 40 and 50,000 tons to China, and now that's sitting up between 80 and 90,000 tons. So low price has done its job. However, consumer campaigns have also played their part in China. We're seeing an increase of 70% from 2022 to 2023 in terms of retail sales, and then nut and shell consumption. One of our aims of the WMO is to try and get Chinese people to eat macadamias more often, not only just around Chinese New Year. And we're seeing that at the moment move from a 90% historically to closer to 60%. So exciting times going forward, particularly in that Chinese space. Next slide, please, Barry. So what's happening in the WMO? Well, the WMO was first domiciled in Singapore. The idea behind that was to be a neutral domicile and a domicile that could attract the Chinese money to be able to be part of it. Unfortunately, through lessons learned, that the Singapore domicile is quite expensive, so we've moved that domicile to South Africa to save on those costs. The new board for the WMO has been appointed, and elections for a full board will take place in 2025. The new WMO will commence operation on the 1st of September, but we've looked at a new membership model Historically, we've only looked at peak bodies, grower bodies across the world, and unfortunately, SAMAC is the only peak body that is well funded, that is able to back an initiative like this. So we need to look further down the value chain, and we need to look across the value chain to both increase funding as well as increase participation and leverage across the chain. So members going forward will include post-peak bodies like ourselves, SAMAC, but also processing and handling companies across the world. An example would be Kenya. We're looking at 9 or 10 processing companies in Kenya. There's 2 processing companies in Guatemala, and there's a processing company in Brazil, and then processing companies across the world that we'll be targeting to be part of the WMO. We're also looking at traders and wholesalers, as well as packers and retailers, and we've already got interest from a number of brands as well as wholesalers to part of the WMO, and hopefully we can convert that going forward. So a different method going forward, but as came out, the forum where we had a cross section of the industry, what the WMO is doing from a consumer awareness perspective and creating market is important for the whole value chain.
All right. I don't know whether you can still see the slides, but I can't see the slides and the screen at the same time. So I've just swapped to another screen quickly to just look at whether there are any questions for Miles. And I see there is one that came in. There's a question on whether Miles can share his presentation at the end of the webinar, as it's difficult to listen to and read the slides at the same time. Lizelle, I'll leave that up to you. And then another question for Miles is, please can you indicate who are the current interim directors of the new WMO based in South Africa?
So the interim directors currently are from South Africa are myself and Peter van der Westhuizen. Then we have Graham Rust from Kenya, Thomas Nottebottom from Guatemala, and then Larry McHugh, who's the independent chairman, who is originally from Australia, but he's our independent chairman. I don't think I've missed out on anybody else, have I?
No. All right. I don't see any other questions for you, Miles. So maybe from my side, you've spoken a lot about the effort that will have to go in the next 5 years through the WMO to create that market awareness in order to take up the expected volume increase. Do you think that the WMO, as it stands today, is well funded to take that challenge into the future?
Perry, if you look at the numbers, essentially, if we need around $5 million a year to do what we want to do. Currently, unfortunately, we've only got $1.2, $1.3 million a year, but the crop is increasing, so we will be able to increase that going forward. With the new membership model, and that was one of the reasons behind the membership model, is so that we can increase that value to closer to the $2 million region sooner rather than later. Every dollar is going to help to do this, but we can move the dial significantly even at the $1.2, $1.3 million. It was interesting in the forum at the WMO, Gillian had organized the mushroom guys who in the US they've got a marketing campaign in the US based on around $2 million, and they've moved the dial significantly for mushroom demand in the US, and so that's exciting for me to hear. So although with our modest budget, we can still move the dial, but we don't have enough money for the size of the crop coming.
A new question came in, Miles, that at the beginning of the presentation, you said, there is more positiveness going around, but, generally everybody spoke that at the current price levels, and I think current in this terms means last year, that the general feeling is that the nut industry is not sustainable at that price level. The question is, why is that?
So if you take your cost of production across the different regions, there's only a very few pockets that are currently above the cost of production, even at these levels. Yes, you might have a grower here or there, but at the average levels of 2.5 tons a hectare across the world, from a macadamia perspective, these prices aren't covering the cost of production. So either the prices have to move up, or we have to reduce the amount of supply, i.e. growers going out of macadamias. This is very evident in what the almond board had to say in the almond roundtable at the INC, where a majority of the almond growers are below the cost of production, so the prices are unsustainable at these levels. And in California at the moment, a good 17 or 18% of the area under almonds is actually up for sale, but there's no buyers for that product as yet. Not for those farms as yet. So therefore, it shows that these prices can't continue at these levels without either they're increasing to be able to sustain growers worldwide, or either change in supply.
Correct. Can you remember the eight acres that were up for sale? 7,000 acres. It was a lot.
Yeah, it was a significant amount. I remember I turned it into a percentage so I could remember it.
Yeah. But Miles, the other question around the WMO that we regularly get is who around the world are in support of the WMO?
So across the value chain, everybody realizes that something has to be done from a consumer awareness perspective. So the WMO has got some more support worldwide. It's whether the countries are set up to be able to support the WMO. So if we look at Kenya, they're very keen on being a part of the WMO, but on an individual company basis, because they don't have a peak body that's well funded. So we're looking at significant support from Kenya. We're also seeing quite a number of the different African countries wanting to be part of the WMO. So your Malawis and your Zambias and those sorts of countries. So we do have support, although no money is coming out of those particular countries at this stage. Guatemala is in full support of us. There's two major processors in Guatemala and they're behind us. There's one major processor in Brazil and they're behind the WMO. Vietnam is behind the WMO. China is a different one because China won't spend their money outside of China. However, we are currently in negotiations with them or talking to them to try and help them spend their marketing budget within China. And so there's still ongoing discussions with China on that. Australia, you would have heard quite a lot about Australia. Australia's mechanism at the moment is that the industry is under significant pressure financially, and therefore they have got a government program whereby the government program will only allow them to fund our Australian-only marketing activities, and therefore growers there, given the financial pressure at the moment, aren't willing to double dip in terms of levies for the WMO. So it's likely that going forward that the Australia won't be members of the WMO. However, they would still want to be part of a subcommittee in terms of forming strategy. So we expect to still see a bit of money flowing from the Australia into the WMO, but they won't be full members of the WMO.
Thank you, Miles. And then there's a new question that came in. The question is, so how is the WMO then funded?
So the WMO is funded on a dollar per ton basis. As a member of the WMO, you would pay on a dollar per ton. Currently, SAMAC, we are the majority funder of the WMO. If you look at your levy that you pay over to SAMAC, around 22 cents of that levy goes into the WMO from a marketing perspective.
And Miles, maybe just talk a little bit about the new model and you've mentioned that, that we would like to then attract funding from outside of the industry, still in the value chain, but not necessarily from the grower base.
Yeah, so we're looking at down the value chain. So your wholesaler, particularly in the US, who is wanting consumer, it's in their interest for consumer awareness. So our idea behind that is to get them to be part of the WMO. We then have more members of the WMO who can then leverage off what we're doing, which is only to our advantage. But what we're trying to do from those particular individuals, incentivize them to say that if you buy product from a WMO member, i.e. any SAMAC handler or any South African handler as such, you won't have to pay for that particular tonnage, but you'll have to pay for any tonnage that you source outside of the WMO members. So it's one of the ways we're trying to incentivize participation in the WMO, but the key here is to get additional funding and also to get people closer to the coalface at the table.
All right, now I'm going to allow one more question here, Miles, and then we need to move on to the rest of the presentation. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time. But there's one question here is, it seems that we are exporting our nuts to other countries. Can't we develop the market locally?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Historically, we haven't, South African handlers haven't focused on the South African market because of the cost of macadamias. Now that the price of macadamias has come down to a more competitive level in the local market, we've seen a lot more interest in the local market, and players in the local market have started to demand significant amount more nuts over the last 18 months. What SAMAC has done is we have instigated a market research on the local market, which is currently being undertaken, whereby once we have that research on who's buying nuts, where they're buying nuts, and where there's the most opportunity for us, we will then, on the back of that, put forward a marketing campaign to increase the local market. The handlers themselves have got an oil campaign that should go live hopefully within the next 6 to 12 months as well. So there is some effort being done in the local market as well.
Okay, good. Peter, just before I give the floor to Lizelle, you made an interesting observation just as we started this call before the rest of the people joined, about the people down the value chain that attended the forum, and it was not only growers. Would you like to say something about that?
Perry, I think, for me, that is really the standout thing of that get-together we had with the WMO. There were people from throughout the supply chain that attended. It's not prior years mainly are based around suppliers, but this year there were traders, wholesalers, packers, and even brand owners, and everybody shown a lot of interest in the WMO. But even more encouraging for me is that everyone is aligned in terms of the target markets we're looking at and our approach in entering these target markets. And there was no eureka moment where light bulb went on and say, listen, guys, you're going in the wrong direction. Everybody is very much aligned in what the approach is. I think everybody was just aware that the challenge remains around the funding of it. With the current funding we get, I think we will still achieve the goals. It might just take a little bit longer. If we can increase the funding through what Miles discussed, we can possibly achieve these goals a little bit quicker. And for me, those are the key things that I took out of that.
Thank you for that. I think the WMO has been in the making for a while now, a couple of years that we've been working with the WMO, but I see the traction that we get is more evident the further we go down this road. There's definite evidence that it is the right way for us to go and explore the market and develop the market and create the demand across the world. Lizelle, I'm now going to turn the focus on to you, and if you can please share with our audience a little bit more, start a little bit, about the INC itself and the roundtables, and then move over to talk about the macadamia roundtable in specific.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Like Perry indicated in the beginning, it's usually a 2.5 3-day event that is attended by a lot of people. So maybe on the next slide, in summary, what we've observed while we were attending the conference, they are estimating that about 6.2 million tons will be sold or produced in terms of the various nuts, which is an 8% increase to the previous year. But bear in mind, this is kernel, except for pistachio. What we also observed is in terms of pine nuts, almonds, hazelnuts, there's an increase of about 76%, 22 and 20 respectively. But I think what's important to note here is that they had much lower volumes last year. That's why it looks significant. With regards to macadamias, pistachios, and Brazil nuts and walnuts, they estimate the increase in production to be around and about 2 to 8% from the previous year. So that's just a general observation in terms of discussions that took place at the INC. Then, in terms of the macadamia roundtable discussion, for those who haven't attended before, all the various nut groups gets their roundtable discussions, and the INC select the people that will form part of that roundtable, and they tend to have a more interest in traders, in handlers, than commodity organizations talking there. So this year we had the chair was Graham Rust representing Kenya. We had Jill White from Green and Gold, and I just want to applaud her for doing a sterling job while she was presenting at the INC. We had Ben Adams, who's the CEO, Marquise representing Australia's view, Jose Eduardo from Brazil, and then we also had Thomas Nottenbaum from Guatemala, and then last but not least, very important, Cheng Lu representing China. So what they do, they kick off the event first by starting, if we look at the next slide, they start off the event by maybe just setting the ground to say, what are we agreeing on? And I don't think anybody of us was not agreeing that 2023 was a very volatile year. The buyers did respond very good to the lower prices. And then also we see this season that there was not so much rollover stock coming into the 2024 season, which makes us optimistic because, as you know, more than a year ago, 2 years ago, we were one of the nut groups that weren't, we weren't rolling stock over. So it was something new for us. Then the next slide, what you will see is this is the INC roundtable, Macadamia roundtable discussion document or statistics or data, which basically reflect what was produced last year and what was produced or what are we forecasting for this year. And interesting, or actually we should still applaud our farmers. Obviously South Africa is still the largest producer of macadamia, and I think if you add Kenya with us, then we're basically definitely the biggest, Africa is the biggest producers of macadamia. And what they do in the panel discussion, they work a bit through the previous crop as well as the current crop to talk what is happening, what are they foreseeing. So I'll take you through the next viewpoints and questions that was asked to the panel during the Macadamia Roundtable. In terms of South Africa, I think most of you are aware that despite El Nino, we had a good weather, so we had an increased crop. But on top, we need to keep in mind that we establish in the late teens, a lot of new hectares, new orchards that's also coming into production. In terms of the current year, we do an early crop forecast, usually in February. And at that stage, it reflected a 92,000 tons production or forecast, let me say that. And we will soon in the next year, we do another one, but our early estimates was in the area of 92,000. Reports are showing that some of the crop was a bit late, but the unsound kernel has vastly improved. So that is just a few notes in terms of South Africa. If we look at the next slide, which is Australia, I think Miles touched on a lot of it. New South Wales, during the flowering and pollination, there were some wet conditions that impacted the crop, but also like you are aware, in the previous about approximately 12 months ago, they also had huge floods that obviously had an impact on New South Wales. Bundaberg, in terms of 2023, they delivered good yield, so that was good to know. In terms of the 2024 season, what Ben, who represented Australia, said is while they were supposed to start with harvesting, they noticed they had some problems as it was raining, so they could not clean properly the orchards before starting with the harvesting. But at this stage, they are comfortable with the 56,000 tons that they are predicting would be the forecast for this year. Also, like there's new plantings in Bundaberg region, and so we will also see a steady increase in terms of new orchards coming into productions. And important to note, in Australia, Queensland is producing about 70% of the Australian crop. When Ben was talking about Australia, he was also referring to that they prices were not sustainable, as a question was asked about it. He was referring to on-farm gate prices. Nut and shell was around about $1.7 to $1.9, which wasn't sustainable. It's not breaking even, and they were referring to prices more between 3.20 Aussie dollars and 3.50 Aussie dollars. So that was, I think, the sentiment as well that Miles also alluded to. Then the next one after Australia, if we look at Brazil, they had drought and poor prices, and that result automatically in a decrease in spend of orchard maintenance. So obviously that influenced the crop size. But looking forward to the current year, under the current conditions, El Nino, extreme dry weather, over the flowering seasons, heat waves, they are not foreseeing a great crop coming forward. Just for information, in terms of Brazil, there's very little consumption of macadamias in Brazil. They're more looking to other nuts at lower price ends. But Eduardo, who presented on behalf of Brazil, said the positive side was that they are starting to incorporate macadamias in their ice cream. So there was still a bit of upswing in terms of uptake of their nuts. So after Brazil, we've got Guatemala. And you will see the patterns follows the same in terms of weather. The past 2 years, they had very, very limited rain, and they are really mostly dry land farming. They had very dry conditions. So together with the low prices, what happened in Guatemala is a lot of the farmers did not harvest. Was also said was a lot of the macadamia farmers are also coffee farmers, so that's a way that they are sustaining themselves. And then also, if they look at the past season, and I think also the current season, there is huge labor scarcities, and there's also a rise in cost in labor. So that's a huge challenge in Guatemala. They are currently looking at new innovations, mechanizing, ways to get around the shortage in terms of labor availability. With the current year, the weather conditions seems to be a bit more favorable, but bear in mind that they weren't really looking after the orchards during the previous years. Also interesting about Guatemala is that they basically have 3 exporters. 2 of them are kernel and a bit of nut and shell, and also one exporter only nut and shell. They're also looking at the opportunity to start creating demand in their own market, which they said they will possibly start this year with. So after Guatemala, we've got Kenya. They, same as South Africa, also between 2015 and 2019, more hectares were established, so obviously more production will come forward. There was, however, same as in other countries, a decrease in investment in orchards. I mean, the cost was so high if we look at input costs, especially fertilization costs. Despite this, I think the silver lining for them was that in the past, Kenya could only export kernel, and their government allowed them to export nut and shell. So that was sort of a silver lining for them. So in 2024, Grain said, according to them, remember they've got 2 seasons, early season and a later season. So for the early season, about 45 to 50% has been sold as nut and shell. However, there was some recent floodings, which you would have seen, that might impact their crop. I think also something important to mention what Graham said is then the neighboring countries, Tanzania, Uganda, and Rwanda, they've also started with plantings of new hectares, small volumes, not large, but that will also come in production in due course. And a lot of the Kenyans are interested to look into those countries with processing facilities. So yeah, and they, Uganda, Rwanda will work on the same commercial hub as what the Kenyan are currently working on. Then in terms of China, I think like we said, a very important market for us. Chen Lu was presenting here, and you will see I typed the over forecast in 2023. They actually had an over forecast in 2024 as well. Chen Lu indicated they had extreme dry weather in Yunnan, which is the big producing area or region. And then in the second biggest producing region, which I'm not going to pronounce that name today, they had a lot of pest and disease problems that influenced the crop. I think what's important to indicate going forward to the 2024 crop in a trade show that took place in April, the figure that was circulated or presented there was 110,000 tons. This figure has since April now been reduced to 68,000 tons. And Chen Lu indicated the reason for that was they had excellent flowering, but when it came to other weather conditions, it obviously reduced the crop. And like I said on the presentation as well, some regions had hail, which will impact the crop, and the weather conditions isn't very good at this stage in terms of the production areas. I think what's also important to indicate what Chen Lu indicated is that TikTok is really influencing consumers. There seems to be a slight change in demographics, who is consuming macadamias. And specifically, if we look at the teenagers, seems to be a big drive in China. So yeah, they were referring to a crispy, wasabi, macadamia. There's a lot of branding taking place there and brand owners been promoting it actively. So still a very active market. And I think then with the second last slide, this was also presented by the team and discussed. What you will see there is how macadamia, that these are macadamias that has been imported to China, and you can see, and I think you are aware, like last year, how the bar continues to move upward. The black part there is representing South Africa imports that took place. And like Miles said, if we look back, about 150,000 was consumed of the 3,000 tons that was produced. So important market, but not the only market that we should be focusing on. Chen Lu was also asked during the panel discussion, is there going to be a ceiling for macadamias? And he was saying the market is there, the market is continuing to grow, but there needs to be a balance between the consumer demand and the price needs to be sustainable. So I think that was one of the important things mentioned. And then with the last slide, they concluded the panel discussion, the roundtable, to say prices outlook are more positive, like Miles said and Perry said earlier, and Peter said prices weren't sustainable. It started to move an upward curve, and there's great opportunities for product development and market expansion. And for us as SAMAC who are there, I think our take out of it is we've got a spectacular product that fits all trends of consumers in China, consumers in Europe, consumers in the USA. And we have sufficient supply, because remember in the past, it was a large hurdle that we did not have sufficient consistent supply and the prices was very, very high. So we've got great opportunities there, and we've also observed while we were attending the WMO as well, there was a lot of product development and innovation that's taking place. So that is from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lizelle. Just one point on Kenya. The nut and shell dispensation will lapse in November. So, we're not sure and they are not sure what the government is going to do post-November with the nut and shell exports. So it was sort of a lifeline that was thrown to the industry by the government. I think that's an important point. And that name that you said you're not going to pronounce is Guangxi.
Thank you, Pierre.
All right, there's a couple of questions here, and I'm going to, oops, I've lost it. I'm going to start with the first one. It was addressed to you, Lizelle, but I think I'm going to pose the question to Peter. Peter, do you think that we will reach a point where we have no closing stock, or that we will have closing stock, like there is with almonds as an example?
I think eventually we should be getting there. In an ideal market, a mature market, that's where we should be going, where we should be getting to a point where we've got stock year round. It's not ideal from a farmer's point of view, but I think from a market and market development point of view, I think we have to get there.
Right. Then there's a question here. The Chinese government also has a hand in TikTok algorithm on how and to who it displays, which types of content. They can use it as a tool to get all, let me just read further, to get all that imported and domestically produced nuts consumed, especially with the youth, which builds in some good lifetime customer value potential, especially seeing the as how addictive nuts are. So I think it's not a question, it's a statement, and I think that whole TikTok environment in China is huge, and how it influences, and we've learned that at the INC on how it influences consumer spending, consumer demand. And then there's a question here, what is the quality like from these emerging grower countries? Peter, maybe a good question to you.
Maybe, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I want to say where there's very much commercial farmers involved. We've seen a lot of South Africans expanding into Mozambique, Zambia, Malawi, those places. I think generally we find very good quality. I think where the challenges come from is more the informal farming, where the guys don't have proper spraying routines, etc., etc. I think there's more of a challenge. But I must say, most of these new developing areas, there's some very, very good quality coming from there.
I think in the past there was this notion that the quality from Kenya is not good, but maybe, Miles, if you would like to talk around what we have learned with the X-ray machines and how that has improved and helped with the nut and shell export market.
Yeah, Perry, the X-ray machine is something that's is going to change the industry and the way it works going forward. At the moment, there's a couple of X-ray machines on the water going to Kenya, but these X-ray machines essentially will be able to take their unsound kernel from 15% down to below the 5% levels, apparently, according to the people that produce these machines. There are a number of X-ray machines on the water to South Africa as well, but essentially what's happening at the moment within Kenya is that Chinese are buying product from Kenya, nut and shell, and taking it over to China, putting it through the X-ray machines, and then to be able to pack that and sell that into the local market. So it definitely is something that's changing the way the market is working at the moment.
Yeah. Good. I don't see any other questions on the chat group, Peter, but I do have two other questions for you. The one is, we often get this question on what will this increased supply do to macadamias? Is it a threat or is it potentially an opportunity?
I personally see it as a massive opportunity. As things currently stand, our industry is a mere infant compared to other nut commodities. We make up around 1% of world nut production. So there's still a large chunk of this pie that we can eat into. But our industry needs to become more focused on creating stability in the market in terms of supply and price. I think that is, we need to get into a position where we can enter into longer term contracts, as well as ensuring all year round supply, which at the moment is not the case. And in order for us to achieve this, we will have to get a larger crop. At the moment, there's a lot of kernel buyers out there that is looking for stock that can't put their hands on stock. We cannot be in a position like that. We need to be able to supply year round. But I also want to say a much larger crop will only be a threat if we don't actively focus on market and product development, really the stuff that the WMO is doing. And we must also be very mindful of not outpricing ourselves in the market, but rather create a more sustainable price for both the supplier and the consumer. There's that fine balance that we need to achieve. The days when we were getting $20, $22 for product, I don't think that's sustainable. We need to get to a level where we have a sustainable industry for all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And no conversation goes by without talking to China. How do you see China as a future market?
Perry, they will remain a key trading partner for years to come. What we saw in 2023, we sat with a lot of carryover stock, prices dropped. And the Chinese took the opportunity. Prices were really at a very good level, and they did product development and opened up new markets. All of us, well aware of the coated coated macadamias that they're selling. The wasabi coated and many other flavors. And that's before you couldn't find those things. Now you can find those all over, not only at major retailers, but you can find them at smaller outlets, etc., and not just in big bulk packets. You can find them in small packets. So suddenly overnight that became a big seller. And that momentum created through introducing these new products is going to carry on for years. I think prior years, we were really battling to sell the Style 1S and also a nut and shell in terms of 20 to 22 millimeter sizing. They've opened up that market, and at the moment there's actually a shortage. I don't think we can supply them enough of the 20 to 22 millimeter size macadamias. Style 1S are sold out. They've actually gone over into buying other kernels, Style 4s. Are using to subsidize or substitute the Style 1Ss. So that is very encouraging. And so and the other thing that's encouraging for me is not just the nut and shell side of in China that is growing. Kernel in general is being consumed by a lot more people in China, and a lot of people perceive that China is purely just nut and shell. But it's not. They're starting to consume the larger basket. Whether they've got the ability to increase their consumption by 50% a year, I don't think that's the case. But that's why we need to open up other markets, the likes of India, etc. But to answer you, they're going to be a key trading partner for years to come, and we need to cherish that.
Yeah. Good. I see that we've reached the end of the scheduled time for this conversation. But maybe just to the panel, Peter, and forgive me for not introducing you properly in the beginning. Peter is the chairperson of our Handlers Forum. And to Miles, who is the commercial director or the director responsible for looking at market access and development at SAMAC. And then you all know Lazelle as the CEO of SAMAC. But in conclusion, any last remarks from any one of you? I'll go around. No, Miles, any last remarks? We can't hear you, Miles.
Sorry, Perry. What I took away from the INC is that we've seen the bottom behind us. there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we sit within all the right consumer trends. The price at the moment is favorable for market development. We've got supply certainty of supply going forward. So I'm excited about the forward-looking outlook for the crop, and as well as our affordability in terms of price back for the grower on farm.
Okay. Peter, any last remarks, if you have any?
I think from my side, I think from the farmer's point of view, I think they need to remain focused on providing a top quality product that we can market all over the world, and I think that is critical. You know, for us to be competitive, we need to differentiate ourselves from that point of view,
and at the lowest cost possible.
Absolutely,
that goes without saying. Yeah, and from our birthday girl, Lizelle, any last you?
Yeah, I think the lessons that we learn is the fact that good years must be used to save for poor years, because agriculture, it doesn't matter where you're sitting, it goes through this. It just depends on the cycle. And I think from my side, last year when we went to the INC was going like a funeral, and it was really, without repeating what Miles said, it's just a better vibe, better opportunities for us going forward. So thank you.
Good. Thank you very much to the three of you for enlightening us on your experiences that you had at the INC. We appreciate your time and effort and the feedback to our stakeholders. To the participants this afternoon, thank you very much. I hope that you gained value out of this webinar and talking about our industry and the future of the industry. We really appreciate your time and hope to see you soon at one of our next webinars that we're going to present to you. Have a good afternoon and keep well.